Welcome into Flag for Discussion, episode 64 for Monday, January 26th. My name is Farbod Merkazi. This is our first off-season episode, and if you thought college football was going to take a nap after Indiana, yes, the undefeated national champion Indiana lifted the trophy last week, you are dead wrong. I'm riding solo this week. Jace took the phrase off-season a little too literally. I'm only kidding. He's out with family and having a lot of fun, and I hope he gets back safe. There's a massive cold front going throughout the Midwest and East Coast, and you know, as a California boy, I feel completely left out of this. And honestly, I know that that's for good reason, because I don't want to be in this, but my friends in New York are under feet of snow. I know Texas and throughout the Midwest are going crazy. So I hope everybody out there is having a lot of fun, making memories with their families, and doing all the stuff that like I had no idea about growing up in 75 degrees in the winter. I mean, I literally texted Jace. I was at the driving range on Monday, and it was, I don't know, maybe 2 degrees where he is in Chicago, and it was 75 and partly cloudy here. So that's not to brag, but more just an explanation and a realization of how different the weather is. And I hope people who are dealing with it are being safe and having fun, and I don't know, sledding, doing all the fun stuff that they have out there. It is kind of crazy. You see the pictures of like grocery stores, especially in New York, where people are expecting like I've heard the phrase snowmageddon, and they're going out, they're buying out all the toilet paper. The grocery stores in New York are completely cleaned out, basically. The beer's gone, the bread's gone, the eggs are gone, toilet paper's gone. I was like, guys, the snowstorm's gonna be bad, but you're not gonna be stuck inside for like 3 weeks. Seeing how people react to stuff like this is part of the reason that I'm just glad that I'm able to just wake up in Southern California and not have to even deal or think about this. But you know, so that's a conversation for another day, maybe with Jace when he's here, about human psychology. But like I said, Jace is out doing fun stuff, and I hope he gets back safely, and everyone out there is enjoying the weather, whether you have warm temperatures or it's you're under feet of snow. I got a lot of things to get off my chest, but it's also a solo show, so I don't know how long this will go. We're gonna have some fun together. There's 2 ways though I know that the off season has started, and the first way is my lovely fiance, the love of my life. I'm gonna get married to her in June. I don't know if she planned it like this or not, but I'm recording this on Sunday to be released on Monday, and the first official Saturday of the college football off season was yesterday. Guess what I was doing for 7 hours? I was gardening. I have rose spikes and things all throughout my hands right now. But that's the first way I know the off season's happening. Granted, she's probably going to kill me for even saying this, because our yards look wonderful and she's always smart and always right compared to me. But is kind of poetic that is happening on the first Saturday of the college football off season. And then the second way I know that the college football off season has started is because we have Dabo Swinney playing like private investigator of sorts. He went scorched earth. We're going to talk about that. There's a playoff stalemate that happened between the Big Ten and the SEC over the last year. We thought we would have answers about a new format going into next year by Friday, this past Friday, and that has proven that nobody wants to talk to each other, or as Andy and Ari say, is both sides like having these all expense paid trips to Florida in the middle of winter to go talk about the playoff format. So they're saying, why rush coming to a conclusion? Why rush finding a solution? Why not just set up another vacation essentially next year when we can, or throughout the summer when we can get another all expense paid trip to Florida and meet a couple times there, but enjoy a 5-star hotel and enjoy ourselves. Greg Sankey, Tony Petitti, the commissioners of the Big Ten, the SEC, they didn't get toward their positions by being dumb. They're very smart people. So I'm assuming there's part of that was like, are we really in a rush? Let's not mess this up. And then the NCAA also, and then we'll have like our cleanup crew. We'll talk about some of the newest coaching hiring, some of the newest transfers. We also have the NCAA approving jersey sponsors for college football programs on your uniforms for this coming year, basically turning they've joined every other sport. Basketball having the jersey sponsor on one side of the jersey, the baseball has the same thing. All these sports have them. So we're going to get into all of that. Make sure you are following us on YouTube at Flag for Discussion spelled out, on Apple Podcast, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts at Flag for Discussion spelled out. We're on Twitter at F4 discussion, and TikTok at Flag 4 discussion. Make sure you're hitting us up, tuning us in. It's a lot of fun to do this, but it's also even more fun when you're involved and your comments are there. You're getting. So we have to start in Clemson. I'm pretty sure everyone by now has heard the Dabo Swinney press conference. He held a press conference on Friday that I can only describe as scorched earth. We haven't really seen a head coach do something like this because no one ever really exposes anyone to the degree that Dabo did. No one exposes because everyone takes part. It's the old philosophy of, hey, I don't like what you did, but I know I'm going to eventually do that to someone, or I have done that to someone. So I'm going to make sure I'm not going to call you out so you don't call me out, or someone doesn't call me out. I don't want to create a chain reaction. Jason and I had talked about that over the week. The one coach you can't do this to is Dabo Swinney, because this is the first offseason he's really taking part in the transfer portal. And this is one of the main ways that Clemson is getting involved in true paying for players to come into their program. They, for a long time, have just been paying their players. So Dabo's done a lot this offseason to innovate, to move the Clemson program forward, even though it's things that he's not comfortable with. It's long understood that Dabo is an old school, failing to innovate, failing to evolve as a head coach, and it set the Clemson program back. He was one of the best coaches for a very long time and built a program that, to be honest with you, a lot of people right now refer to as a blue chip, but before Dabo built them up, was never considered at that level. They were always considered a good program, and Dabo got them to become a great program, won national titles in the 2010s, beat Alabama, and he's failed to evolve since then. And then from there, the Clemson program, there's no doubt it's taking some steps back. And it's not just talking about this past season where they had kind of the season from hell, where Jason and I and everyone in the college football media expected Dabo to go out there and probably be in the national title game. I remember saying at the beginning of the year that if Clemson doesn't win the national title or win something huge this season, they're not going to be great next year, because their roster was so senior laden, so built on this past season alone, and they failed to evolve. But Dabo Swinney and Clemson decide to evolve a little bit. They hire a GM. They have their own GM. Great. Then they start taking part, dipping their toes into the transfer portal. And Luke Ferrelli, he's an ACC Defensive Freshman of the Year. He was at Cal. Justin Wilcox gets fired. They hire Tosh Lupoy. For whatever reason, he decides to transfer out. He goes to Clemson from Cal, and he signs with Clemson. He's under contract with Clemson. He's moved into a dorm room apartment wherever he lives on campus. He's going to class, and he's literally sitting in an 8 a.m. class on Wednesday morning. And this is all according to Dabo, while he's trying to learn whatever he learned at 8 a.m. And his phone buzz. It's Pete Coling, the head coach at Ole Miss. The text says, "I know you're signed, but what's the buyout?" So Dabo Swinney then later on, this is an 8-minute video. If you haven't seen the video of Dabo's press conference, I really encourage you to go watch it. Dabo claimed that Golding, alongside that, sent a literal photo of a $1 million contract, and Clemson didn't flinch. That offer doubled to $2 million. Let's call it what it is. I mean, I don't know if extortion's the right word, because you're not extorting these players. You're not extorting these programs. But compared to the NFL, where contracts can only be negotiated by legit agents, by licensed and registered agents, where contracts are set in stone and contracts are public to the media because of the collective bargaining agreement. Compare that to college football, where Dabo literally says, They had been in constant communication with Luke. They had been in constant communication with Luke's agent. They had been in constant communication. They even called Austin Thomas, the GM of Ole Miss, and it still happened. There was like a bit of a lone wolf thing happening with Ole Miss and Pete Golding, where Dabo and his GM and Clemson's people had basically called Austin Thomas saying, "Hey, we don't like this. He's under contract with us. He's literally going to class at Clemson right now. He's taking part in winter training with us. If you want to go down this road, we will turn you in." And Austin Thomas, allegedly, according to Dabo, said, "Yeah, I don't want to go down this road. I don't want to deal with this. I don't want to mess with you guys, and I don't want to try to get some kid out of a buyout that he has with another program." And in that same process, Pete Golding goes lone wolf and doubles the offer to $2 million. And all of a sudden, Clemson finds out, Dabo finds out as he's driving away from the facility that Luke Ferrelli is in the compliance office asking to enter his name into the transfer portal. We've reached a point in this transfer portal where coaches are not only recruiting their own players, they're not only recruiting kids that they can actively go out and get in the transfer portal cycle, in the transfer portal itself. We're not only high school kids that they can go out and get, but they're also fully admitting that they're recruiting kids on other rosters. And we've seen Lane Kiffin. I think one of the reasons Pete Golding did this is because Lane Kiffin's been doing this to his roster. There was the reported leak a couple weeks ago of Ole Miss defensive players got all of their contracts leaked within the locker room. And the apparent or alleged perpetrator of that leak was Lane Kiffin. And the reason what he was trying to do was saying, like, he showed everyone in that locker room, "Hey, you guys are making X amount of money, but the new kids that Pete Golding and that staff are bringing in are making more than you." And it pissed a bunch of people off. And all of a sudden, a bunch of people from Ole Miss who were on the roster last year and were returning for this next year decided to transfer out. And lo and behold, Lane Kiffin fractured a defensive locker room that was pretty together after his departure in the first place. So it's coaches are it's a pretty nasty cycle in general. But like I said the point about the agent. The craziest part for me is that Ferrelli's agent literally told Clemson, "Hey, if you guys just add another million to our deal, we'll give you the screenshots of texts from Ole Miss and Pete Golding to turn Ole Miss in." This is backstabbing. This is blackmail. That's not how business is conducted in most of these scenarios. But I will say, going back to what I said earlier about how most coaches don't do what Dabo did and hold a press conference and fully allege and turn in another program or another head coach for tampering, is because they all take part into that too. But Pete Golding was the coach that thought it was a bright idea to go at the one guy who you could almost guarantee doesn't tamper, the one guy you can almost guarantee doesn't play ball in the same way that all these other new age coaches are playing ball. Like, if you told me one of the first tampering stories I remember off the top of my head was USC years ago, in Lincoln Riley's first year, all of a sudden Jordan Addison from Pitt ends up in the portal after winning the Bolitnikoff. And it was Pat Narduzzi went in on Lincoln Riley, basically saying, like, this is full blown tampering. This is a massive problem. We cannot have this happen. But USC won out in that, right? Because no one really turned each other in. Pat Narduzzi went on a rant, but it wasn't like that. This is tampering to the nth degree with Pete Golding and Dabo. I think what we're discovering in this day and age in college football, especially as I'm talking to you on January 26th of 2026, until there's something sorted out, until someone gets in trouble, until the NCAA is forced to really act, we're seeing so many legal battles in college football. We see the Darian Mensah thing happening with Duke and Miami, Damon Williams and Washington. This is about to be a lawsuit with Clemson and Ole Miss. For me, I think there's a couple points that I like that immediately illustrate how I feel about this. It's disgusting. that Pete Golding thought you could just go do that. But it's also disgusting that he can go do that. He's not wrong, but like that's my first point is like it shouldn't even be a thing that coaches think about once a kid is signed and enrolled at another school. But at the same time, the reason he's thinking that way is a dog eat dog world. I don't care if it hurts you. I'm trying to save my job. I'm trying to make sure I have a linebacker in my portal next year. Someone took my linebacker by tampering with him, so that makes it okay for me to go do it to them. And the unfortunate reality of this is that no one is going to stop tampering or getting involved in these guys' business like this or these legal battles that are taking place in college football until someone gets in trouble for it and there's actual parameters around it. The fact is, like, it's kind of funny to me where it shouldn't be, but like Dabo Swinney's the one coach you should know not to do this to. Immediately, my entire opinion of Pete Golding went down a notch. Not because I don't think he's a great coach. I think he's a good coach. We don't know how he is as a head coach. His defense wasn't great. He's a defensive coordinator, and at least when some programs are failing, you look at the side of the ball that coach is from. At least that's like Lincoln Riley. At least when USC's been down or failing a little bit, it's not the offense that's the reason that they're bad. Now, Ole Miss went to the semifinal. I get that. I get it. But the reason they couldn't get over the hump was the defense. That was a massive tangent for no reason. All I'm saying is my opinion on Pete Golding, jokingly or non-jokingly, went down a notch when I saw that he literally wanted to go toe-to-toe, battle for battle, eye for eye with Dabo Swinney, knowing that Dabo Swinney is the guy that's going to turn him in more often than any other coach in this country. So Luke Ferrelli has left Clemson. He's about to go to his second school since the transfer portal opened back January 2nd. He went from Cal to Clemson. He's after a bunch of drama. He's leaving Clemson to go to Ole Miss. He's going to play for them. I don't know. We'll see what comes of any legal disputes that come out of this. It'll probably be something in terms of financials. I've seen online that like this, if Pete Golding actually is turned in by Dabo and Clemson, if Ole Miss is actually turned in for tampering to the NCAA and their NCAA decides to actually get involved, it's a level 2 violation, which would be a suspension of sorts and a financial fine. So it's not going to be the end of the world. And to me, to be honest, it's not reason enough to get a coach to stop doing this. Like, if I'm not going to pitch any ideas for any punishments, but if your punishments have legs where you see, like, I don't know, bring up a random coach. If you are Jed Fish at Washington and you see Pete Golding get like 4 games suspended, let's say, and some NIL funding limits or some a bigger punishment that actually has legs, then maybe at that point you can convince Jed Fish at Washington that like, hey, tampering is not okay. Everyone knows tampering like on its own right isn't okay, but like I said, this is an dog eat dog world in college football where coaches, once the kid's in their program, they don't care about what happens to another program, and there's so many millions involved that they feel invincible. Right now, the punishment of a couple game suspension and a massive financial fine, if the NCAA even chooses to come down with a penalty on Pete Golding or Ole Miss, is not enough to dissuade people from going for this in the future. Oh, this is one of our first great legal battles of the ref share era. We'll see what comes of this, what legal battles come from this. I also want to point out one thing for Clemson. There's a long way until we start actually breaking down rosters for next year. But the other reason this hurts Clemson, and not that they can't go out and get another linebacker, but the NCAA listened to college football fans and college football coaches, college football programs, when they said we need to shift the transfer portal. It's fine that it's there. It's fine that kids have freedom of movement, but we can't have the spring portal. If you remember, the spring portal as of last year was such a pain in the ass for coaches because coaches thought I can't install my culture. I can't be hard on the guys. I might need to even move the spring training and our spring game back after the spring transfer portal closes, because if we're in a day and age where, if, like, let's say Kirby Smart, he's harder on defensive lineman who's maybe fourth string, borderline starter, but next year is planned to be a starter. Kirby Smart couldn't like be too hard on him or too hard on the team out of fear of, okay, well, spring ball ends and that kid just decides to leave, and I don't have the opportunity to go out and get another kid, or not even forget the fact that he can't go out and get another guy. He loses one of his key rotation pieces in the spring, and one of the things coaches were asking for is like, I just want to know what my team is at the start of spring ball. So they fixed that part of the transfer portal. What they didn't fix was this new dynamic that's being built with the transfer portal that's opened up on, that is just a one-time transfer portal cycle that opened up on January 2nd this year. A lot of coaches and a lot of programs, if you notice, went quick to find and bring in as many guys as they could, but out of fear of losing more of their own guys and out of fear of being stuck in like March or May, and all of a sudden you are down a couple roster spots, but you didn't expect that because there's only one transfer portal site. So, like, think about it like this: Duke is losing Darian Mensah, and I know there's legal battles there, and I know Duke is trying to keep him in, but they're keeping him, but he's trying to get into the portal, and they had to turn him into the portal because of the buyout Miami's paying and blah, blah, blah. The legal battles will handle themselves. But Duke lost Darian Mensah on the last day of the transfer portal being open. So they went the whole time, the 2 weeks, whatever the transfer portal was open, expecting to have their quarterback for next year. And which means for the entire 2 weeks, they weren't looking for one of the top quarterbacks that was in the portal. And you could argue that like Sam Levitt would never have considered Duke. You could argue that like Damon Williams wouldn't have jumped in the portal to leave Washington to consider Duke. You could argue that these big name quarterbacks couldn't. But in this day and age, with the money involved, we can't assume any of that. Darren Mensah leaves Duke. Duke's left without a quarterback, and all the top quarterbacks are already poached up and taken up by other programs. There's a reason Miami had to go all in on that buyout and risk a big legal fight to get Darian Mensah. And look, he's not there yet. There's legal things to figure out. I get it. But there's a reason Miami had to do that. And it wasn't because it wasn't because they thought Darian Mensah was the best quarterback and they just wanted to wait until the end of the transfer portal to bring him in. It's because they struck out on the other guys that they wanted. And when they struck out, they had to go on a desperate plea to get their quarterback of next year. And it ends up hurting another program and kind of just damaging the look on Miami. In general, like this whole transfer thing, in terms of how programs are built, has fully shifted. Not transfer thing, you know what I mean. The transfer portal being a one-time cycle being open has shifted how coaches approach it. There's a lot more rush to get guys, and there's also a lot more of a damage to happen to programs like Duke who lose their guy at the last minute. They don't get me wrong, the transfer portal, the guys who are still in it can still commit to other programs, but no one else can jump in. So that means Duke, on the last day of the transfer portal being open, they couldn't go and get they couldn't even go and tamper with someone. They couldn't go and talk to, I don't know, Aiden Childs and be like, "How about Duke? And this is what we can offer you." They brought in a quarterback to visit, but I'm sure that guy wouldn't have been called if they needed a quarterback on January 2nd. It's just they lost their main guys. And the transfer portal, the one-time cycle of the transfer portal, is something coaches are figuring out right now. I say all that to say, like, Clemson got damaged by this. They expected to have Luke Ferrelli be one of their starting linebackers and key defensive pieces for this next year. And after the portal ends, now there's no shot for them to go get a player of even close to equal value. And we know how Dabo operates in the portal. I don't even know if they're going to go out and get a kid from the portal anymore. Maybe they'll just cut their losses and move on. But Like I said, if you haven't watched that 8-minute press conference by Dabo Swinney where he went scorched earth on Pete Golding, on Ole Miss, and all of college football, I fully encourage you to do so. It's a massive undertaking by a head coach of Clemson who, let's be honest, is on like shaky legs at Clemson. They're never going to fire him, but it's a program that's just now trying to evolve late into the cycle of college football, and we'll see how Clemson is this next year. But I'm more interested to see how the NCAA reacts to Pete Golding from here. Okay, so just a couple quick moments on this. While Dabo's fighting Pete Golding, the Big Ten and the SEC are fighting everyone else. And this past Friday was a deadline to expand the playoff for 2026. Spoiler alert, they failed. Basically, the SEC wanted 16 teams. They wanted more money. They wanted no automatic qualifiers. They just wanted the basic auto bids that we've had for a while. And also, you have to include Notre Dame in if they're ranked in the top 12 with their deal with Notre Dame. They're going to be admitted into the playoff regardless. But the Big Ten, fresh off of Indiana's win, fresh off of having their third straight national title winner in their conference, is holding strong at the 24 demand. They want 24 teams in the college football playoff with automatic qualifiers throughout, giving a majority of the qualifiers to the Big Ten and the SEC. And it's because they're basically saying if this is a 2014 playoff, both of those conferences are just going to take up as much of the playoff spots as possible. And part of that is, okay, like the reason the SEC doesn't want the automatic qualifier model, even when the Big Ten wanted the automatic qualifier model at 12 teams or 16 teams, even when they wanted that, the SEC stood strong against it, because the SEC is saying on any given year, we're going to get 7 or 8 teams in any ways. Why limit ourselves to 4? Why limit ourselves to 4 guaranteed spots when I can basically just politic my way using our coaches, go on ESPN and try to sway the minds and hearts of the committee? So the Big Ten essentially was holding strong at their 24. The SEC is holding strong at their 16 with no qualifiers other than the auto bids. And I, I don't know. For the next year at least, we are stuck at 12. And I think that's the perfect spot to be. I didn't necessarily want a massive expansion. And Jace has been on here in the past saying the perfect spot to be would be 8 teams. And I can't help but agree with him. This past playoff, now I know Notre Dame, there was a debate for them and there was a bunch of controversy of them being left out. But this past playoff, I think, was the biggest like showcase of, all right, the 12-team playoff might be a good thing. I know people have problems with JMU being in there or Tulane being in there because like they have no shot against the big boys. But the 12-team playoff this year, you could have arguments about some of the teams, maybe Alabama. All in all of those teams were the best teams in the country. And all those teams were probably belong to be labeled as playoff teams. And the way you know that is, yes, Alabama lost 38-3 or whatever that was to Indiana. And maybe Oklahoma didn't belong in the playoff. But would Oklahoma have done any better than would Vandy have done any better than Oklahoma? Would Vandy have done any better than Alabama? And yes, I understand the big elephant in the room is Notre Dame not being admitted. I get that. But in general, I remember looking at this playoff and saying, all right, these are the best teams in the country. I don't think you can argue that. And I don't think you can go home and be too mad about those being the faces of your sport for at least one season. I think 12 teams is a good number. And I really don't want them to screw this up and expand to 16 or 24 teams. Greg Sankey, Tony Petitti. Well, part of Tony Petitti's model is killing conference championship games. And we've talked about this for years. Not years, for months at least. The conference championships games going away mean for the last weekend of the regular season, instead of 1 and 2 playing for the conference title game, number 1 automatically gets the conference championship trophy, and then 2 plays 4, 3 plays 5, or something like that, where those guys also play in for a playoff spot, and then everyone else is an at-large bid. So let's say your 1 automatically gets in, the winner of your 2 and 3 gets in, and the winner of your 3 and 5 gets in, or something like. So that's 3 automatic spots, and that's the Big Ten and the SEC. And then there will be more on top of that that would be automatic for other reasons. Maybe it's 1 and 2 automatically get in, then 3 plays 6, 4 plays 5. I think that's actually what the what the structure would be for Tony Petitti. So then that would be 4 automatic spots for the Big Ten, 4 automatic spots for the SEC, and a Notre Dame automatic spot if they're ranked high enough. And now with this 2014 proposal by the Big Ten, they want to add more automatic spots, up to 7 or 8 teams for each conference. And, good for them. They want the money. I get it. There's nothing that wrong or inherently crazy about it. I just don't love the fact that in a college football world where our best part of the sport, and you may disagree with me, but I will fully stay strong on this. The best part of our sport is Michigan, Ohio State. It's Georgia, Alabama. It's the big games and the big moments on October 2nd. The playoff is a lot of fun, and we had a ton of fun covering it this year, and we're gonna have a ton of fun covering it next year. And it it truly adds a fun little twist on how we crown our national champion in college football. I fully get that, but the playoff shouldn't be. We shouldn't turn this sport into the NBA where it was, all right, the regular season's the regular season. Just make sure you don't lose too much. As long as you're in the dance at the end, that's all that matters. One of the things I remember, like when I first got into college football, one of the reasons that like caused me stress and gave me grays early on, but also kept me dialed into the sport, kept bringing me back, was because every single game was a life of its own. Every single game mattered. And every single game, if you lost, would be the difference between you maybe making a national title run and going to the Tony the Tiger Bowl. All of a sudden, you have all these hopes for your program. You might be 7-0 heading into week 8, week 9, if you have a bye week. And you're like, oh, yeah, we're about to be we're about to be playoff contenders. We're about to go try to shock the world. And then all of a sudden, you have a bad second quarter, and now you're 7-1. That was one of the biggest parts of college football that kept bringing me back, but causing me so much agony. And the fact that you want to expand to 12 teams already, the meaning of those games has taken a little shift. The argument we had this year was about 2-loss Miami and 2-loss Notre Dame. Which one should be in the playoff? We can't keep moving the goalposts here. We can't go to 24 teams and be like, all right, well, Iowa lost 5 games, but here are the 8. They won 8 games, and they were against Ohio State. They were against Michigan. They beat really good teams. We can't have that conversation. We can't have a sport where an 8-5 team is in the playoff. And if you're an NFL fan, you can be like, well, stuff like that happens in the NFL. Yeah, this isn't the NFL. This can't be just the reality of college football year in, year out. And I'm not happy about that if that is. But several massive tangents later, college football is going to have a 12-team playoff next year. Tony Petitti, Greg Sankey, the Big Ten and the SEC did not agree on a new format for next season. So we are sticking strong at where we are right now. All right. Some quick hits from us before we get into our final little spiel. First of all, Ohio State hires former Pittsburgh Steelers offensive coordinator, former Falcons head coach, former Titans OC, Arthur Smith as their OC. Obviously, Brian Hartline left Ohio State in the middle of the playoffs because he got the head coaching job at USF. And they were looking for a new head coach. Arthur Smith, as they were looking for a new OC. Arthur Smith, as a head coach, wasn't the most successful in Atlanta, but he was pretty successful as an OC. They were the 1 seed with the Titans. They won more games than people expected to with the Steelers. This guy, I've seen people argue with each other on Twitter about how good Arthur Smith is for Ohio State because he loves his 3 tight end sets. He loves Jonnu Smith. There was a joke that Arthur Smith saw a Jay Smith on Ohio State and thought it was Jonnu, so he took the job. But the debate right now on Twitter is, how is this going to hurt Jeremiah Smith? Is this going to hurt the receivers that they have that are just unbelievable at Ohio State, because he loves the tight end game so much? He loves the three. I think a lot of that's phooey. I think when you hire an experienced coach, your program takes a step up for that, especially a coach who has been a head coach in the past. He has had to, albeit it was the NFL versus college football, but he has had to figure out game management, timeout management, clock management, play calling. Arthur Smith is not your apex coach, but he's also not your bottom tier coach. He's much closer to apex than bottom tier, and I think people who are getting mad about Arthur Smith coming in at Ohio State are just kind of living in la la land. This is an experienced head coach, experienced offensive coordinator who's called good offenses in the past, and you're still probably running the Ryan Day offense in general, just through the eyes and lens of Arthur Smith. The funnier part of this whole scenario for Arthur Smith is his dad is the CEO and founder of FedEx, the shipping company. So everyone basically thinks, oh, this is just Ryan Day's ploy to get more NIL funding to the program. Which honestly, if that was the case, if you were an offensive coordinator somewhere and your dad was a billionaire, would you ask him for money? I assume you would, but I feel like it's different between like traditional donors and like your dad helping out his son who's just the OC of a program. Regardless of that, we have a Lane Kiffin problem. We've gone over the transfer portal. We've gone over tampering. Lane Kiffin's fully disregarded every contract in existence, and while by doing that, he's ended up with the number one portal class in the country. He was the portal king, as he was dubbed when he was the Ole Miss head coach. Now he's literally the Tiger King, quote unquote, at LSU. He just got Jordan Seaton, the offensive tackle from Colorado, Sam Levitt, the quarterback from ASU, and Principal Umanmielen from Ole Miss, the defensive lineman. He's putting together an all-star team. And maybe Pete Golding learned it from Lane. It doesn't matter what anyone else has. All that matters is what you can staff your roster with. And realistically, Dabo Swinney should be mad at Pete Golding. Sure. Dabo Swinney should be mad at the state of the sport. But Dabo Swinney should be mad at a guy like Lane Kiffin, because Lane Kiffin's at least showing everybody, hey, this is how screwed up the sport is if you just take advantage of every loophole that you can find. And Lane Kiffin's doing that. LSU is going to be on title watch in year one. They have a bunch of pieces. They brought Caden Durham back. Lane's filled out that defense. Lane's filling out that offense day by day. They just brought in the number one tackle in the portal. They brought in the number one defensive lineman, the number one quarterback. Lane Kiffin is going to have an excellent football team at LSU next year. It just depends on how you want to look at the scenario based off of like the at what cost scenario. All right, finally, the last story I want to talk about for a second is the NCAA approved jersey patches. 2 patches, you can have them 4 square inches on your jersey. This is basically a move that's going to generate millions to fund athletic departments looking for new ways to pay players. It also is a way for athletic departments to just get new funding for their own work. We've talked about it in the past, but compare the facilities of these college programs and NFL facilities. College programs have them beat by a long shot. Not the brand new NFL facilities, but like the reason I say this is when athletic departments had a surplus or had extra money, it went into paying for new facilities or new uniforms or fun things for the program to give recruits another reason to come in. But now that you are using some of those funds and donors' funds to pay players, there's less funding for your actual program. And there's less funding for like new facilities, fixes, repairs, what have you, renovations of your stadium. So they need to have an ad like the jersey sponsor, commercial jersey sponsor, just to bring in more funding, whether it's to pay more players or whatnot. But It got me thinking because like schools like Oregon, if they already have a Nike patch on their jersey, and yes, the rule of this is beginning August 1st, Division One teams can place up to 2 patches, no more than 4 inches, and these are no more than 4 square inches on uniforms for regular season games. These are in addition to the logos already allowed for the uniform manufacturer. So when I was thinking about Oregon, I was like, well, they already have Nike. Are they just going to put another Nike logo there, or are they going to go out and get a contracted sponsor some to put on as a jersey patch there in addition to Nike? And does Nike have to be okay with them? So I kind of want to play a little matchmaker. If we're starting to sell our souls in college football just to be bring in money, let's be honest about what brands these programs could be getting involved in. Indiana, let's start with them. They should get TurboTax as their sponsor because they've Cursignetti and Indiana. They found a way to audit the Big Ten from the moment they walked in, and they found every way possible to make sure that they had all the loopholes. Not that the championship was cheap, but their it's kind of playing on the whole joke of Indiana's cheating where they're not. But they found every way that they could to get that trophy. They get TurboTax. Miami, what does Miami get? I think Miami, they should get sponsored by Zillow. They spent all season and especially the last 2 weeks talking about how Hard Rock Stadium's their house. They're going to protect their house, and they just let Indiana move into their house and win the national championship on their turf. And mind you, their house, Indiana was mostly Indiana was the majority of fans at that stadium on the national title game. And we talked about the game itself, but Indiana had a good home field advantage at Miami's home. So Miami needs a Zillow sponsor to maybe find a new home somewhere in the 305. LSU actually has ChatGPT for this because I was trying to figure out what LSU should be. LSU is Red Bull because with Lane Kiffin, you're either going to fly and Red Bull gives you wings, or you're going to have a heart attack. There's no middle ground between what Lane Kiffin does. He doesn't do anything at 50 miles an hour. He's either stopped or he's going 100. So Red Bull fits perfectly fine there. For Oregon, I would give Oregon a Lego sponsor if they're not going to stick with Nike. Dan Lanning and Marshall Malkow, their GM or chief of staff, whatever you want to call it, have shown an inclination to really, really be apt roster builders. And Legos like building on top of each other. And Oregon, for the last whatever you want to look at it, is it's either Legos because of roster building or because Dan Lanning's first year, 10-3, no playoff appearance, 9-4, no playoff appearance, and a 10-3, one step better. Then they go 13-1, Big Ten title, losing the second round of the playoff. Then they go 13-1, don't win the Big Ten title, but losing the third round of the playoff. Now, so you're building on top of each other like a Lego. Let's see if next year, if the Lego thing holds true, will Dan Lanning and Oregon lose in the national title game? Ohio State, I mean, I think this is the easiest one because of their new offensive coordinator. Arthur Smith, all he has to do is call up FedEx, call up his dad, and see if they would be interested in sponsoring them for at least a year. I won't miss. I think this one I got a little too much credit. I credited myself too much because I thought it was funny. Have you ever used WhatsApp before? It's encrypted messaging. People can't like find it. Uh, Pete Golding and Lane Kiffin before they need a WhatsApp sponsorship because of all the lone wolf tampering that they're taking care of. I don't know. After that, like Nvidia for Vanderbilt, they're no longer like a basement dweller anymore. They're not that nerd that you grew up with. They're all of a sudden a high powered engine that is operating for you, and you actually have to be scared of them. And we'll see how they keep building from here because the sky's the limit for Vanderbilt based off of this new cycle. All of a sudden, basically more money coming in and blah blah. I don't know. I wanted to play on matchmaker. It was might have been stupid. You have every reason to have turned that off before I started the segment, but I thought it would be a little funny. If you have any more matchmaking brands for different programs, or if you disliked what I said about one of the programs, you want to change the brand to someone else, please let us know. We are on Apple Podcast, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast at Flag for Discussion. We're on YouTube at Flag for Discussion spelled out. We are on Twitter at F4 Discussion and TikTok at Flag 4 Discussion. College football is in a mix of high stakes litigation. There's corporate branding, Lane Kiffin doing whatever he wants. It's beautiful. It's a mess. I love every second of it, even though saying that. Both of us will be back next week. Jace, we'll make sure he's on so we can talk about Dabo, because I'm really interested to see how this whole thing turns out. If Dabo Swinney and Ole Miss actually filed the allegations to the NCAA. And secondly, if the NCAA actually does something to Ole Miss or Pete Golding, see if there's any punishments that actually come down that have legs. That dissuade people from doing. The only way, like I said, I'll say it again, the only way we can keep tampering from happening again is if there's actual legitimate tangible punishments that coaches want to avoid. We'll see how this all pans out from here. I've given you the socials already. Jace will be back next week. Thank you so much for riding with me. This has been Flag for Discussion, episode 1 of the offseason. For myself, for Bud Merkazi, we'll see you next week.